So, our today's guest is all about putting integrity first, service before self, and excellence in all we do. These were some of the core values that were installed in him, especially when he served the US Air Force. He is now working in the dynamic logistics, transportation, freight tech, and border supply chain solutions, which is something that he is expert in. But when it comes to what he really believes in, he believes in people and how people excel in whatever they do, and how the mind is something that's some of the greatest things that were produced. Let's welcome Chris on 10 Minutes of Hiding Wisdom, where he will tell us about his experience, especially in the US Air Force, how he diverted towards something else, and where he is currently at. Hi, Chris. How are you doing today?
Doing well, Manal. Thank you so much for that lovely intro. Great to be here with you today.
Of course. Thank you so much for joining us, Chris. So, Chris, I'd love to hear about your experience with Air Force and then delving deeper into your career.
Yeah, sure. So it's been a lengthy career. I think I'm almost 20 years in now. So yeah, you mentioned the Air Force. So absolutely. So when I finished school, I was like a lot of younger folks that didn't quite fully understand what they wanted to do professionally in life. And so although I never considered myself someone who would ever go into the active duty military, I found myself as that was certainly a track that became way more attractive to me after you finish your undergrad degree and not quite sure what you want to do. And it enabled me a lot of travel. And I went in September of 2001. So for a lot of folks, you'll remember that was a very defining year in history for this country and the world. And so it certainly wasn't an experience that maybe others have had. I was certainly fully aware that I would be not spending a lot of time in the United States. And sure enough, I spent most of my active duty, which was close to 5 years, over in the Middle East region for obvious reasons. But yeah, I mean, a truly great experience. Taught me just a whole lot about myself, a whole lot about people. Met a lot of folks that the military is truly a melting pot of folks from all walks of life. And for me, I feel like I needed that. I was kind of born and raised in somewhat of a bubble, and so for me, it was very educational to get out and not only see the world but meet a lot of amazing people in all parts of the world. So. The lessons I got from the military certainly have stayed with me. And as you stated in your opening remarks, I'm a big believer in integrity and big believer in assisting people. And as I often say, I mean, that's my biggest, to me, success is seeing others succeed and being able to kind of know I had a say or a part in those folks achieving some level of success. So yeah, I've carried a lot of those lessons into me. And again, after my commitment was up to the United States government, I kind of parlayed that into the field of being in supply chain and logistics, kind of naturally evolved into the as we call the civilian sector or the private sector. And again, for the last 15 years post-military, I've worked at some really cool companies, all pretty much within supply chain logistics, primarily with a big technology or, a forward-thinking type of mentality.
Okay, I love how you mentioned what you took away from the military, then you decided to put that into use when you actually joined companies. So I can definitely see why you believe that people are the core asset, because I can definitely see why you would find happiness in putting people first. And that's something that's so important, because these days a lot of people focus on themselves, and I think it's wonderful to see that people like you still exist who are always putting other people first, especially when it comes to helping, because I think the pandemic definitely taught us a lot, and I think empathy was some of the greatest assets that came out of the pandemic. So I'm glad that people like you still exist. So thank you for sharing that, Chris. My next question for you would be that what got you into the transport industry? Like, what's so special about that? Why not some other industry?
Yeah, great question. Logistics is something I didn't know. I don't think most people, unless you're in the industry, kind of just, you don't really know what that means. And as you can attest, this day and age, especially courtesy of COVID and other global disruptions, you see supply chain and logistics in the headlines all the time, not necessarily for good reasons, right? And you go out to your local grocery store or retail outlets and you can't find things you used to find, or inflation starting to become an issue in the States and elsewhere, right? You start to go, what's the root cause? And a lot of that has to do with, disruption in supply chain logistics. So I'd never anticipated getting in this field. In fact, when Air Force, most people assume that you're flying a plane of sorts or a pilot. That was exactly what I thought my path would be. But due to like a slight color blindness, they weren't going to put me in the back of a $20 million fighter aircraft. So as a default setting, they said, what do you think about supply chain and logistics? And it sounded kind of interesting. And again, this is roughly 20 years ago. So I've been here ever since. And at this point, I'm grateful to see that over the years, it's become a very in vogue field to be in. And I think as part of your discussion around, opportunities for candidates and employers. I think we're starting to see a rebirth of certain industries that may in the past historically not been as, in the spotlight. And logistics now has become, tier one programs within some of the greater academic institutions. And I'm glad to see younger generations starting to go, this sounds, if you like problem solving, this is a great field to be in. And there's a function for everyone from product and engineering and dev to sales and customer success and operations, you name it. There's always a place within this field for talent. So yeah.
That's very true. So you mentioned that there is a lot of opportunities that are growing, but why do you think there's still a gap, Chris? A lot of people are still seeking jobs, and there's still a lot of opportunities that exist. And when you go on the news, you see a lot of articles being like, "There's scarcity of talent and everything." So where do you think the bridge comes? Like, how do you think? Because you've been in this field for a while, how do you think we could solve this bridge?
Yeah, it's a challenging environment right now for a lot of folks. I mean, this idea of the great resignation or the great reshuffle, I've heard it put a couple ways. And I think it all ties into, I think employees have felt this idea of the corporate greed that's kind of been pervasive in a lot of the business world and elsewhere has finally come to a head, where I think people from blue collar and white collar are starting to realize that their contributions aren't per se being recognized by a lot of organizations. So that in turn has kind of created this mass movement of folks finally drawing a line in the sand and saying, I know what my worth is. And if you don't see that potential or that talent in me at this organization, I'll find it elsewhere. So really it's the boardroom and the C-suite of public and private companies that are in a scramble right now, trying to figure out, how do we fix this? So it's creating a need for cultural shifts and a reprioritization of employees versus profits, people over profits, right? It's more than words on a wall or some value or PR stunt, right? And so, yeah, and to address the other part of your question, I think that we need to be kind of, understanding where there's certain spaces in the service sector, more of some of the other hourly wage type jobs that I think that you're seeing there's a huge gap. I mean, drive around any town, you'll see, now hiring signs across the board. But you have to, in comparison to the more of the white collar professional workforce, I think there's a discrepancy on not to say there aren't needs on both sides, but I think that you need to delineate between the service sector and those type of jobs that are associated versus, the corporate world. And I think that's where you see candidates now going, I'm hearing about all these great job opportunities, but I'm not necessarily seeing that for myself. And I think it goes back to, well, you need to ask yourself, what is your industry? What is your field? What is your tenure? What is your title? What are your comp expectations? And there's a natural progression as you go further up in your career that there won't be quite as many opportunities. That's by design. No different than the military doesn't have thousands of generals. They got thousands of troops, but that's a filtration process by design. You can apply that also in the private sector. So again, the encouraging thing is I think companies are finally waking up. And I think the candidates still have have leverage right now. But I don't want to say that's across the board, because I assure you there's candidates that I talk to and say, I'm hearing about all these great job opportunities, but I can't seem to find one. So I think it's not a one size fits all answer to that question.
That's very true. I think it varies from industry to industry. And I think it's great to see that's definitely the employees are waking up, especially because I think a lot of people weren't being recognized for their efforts, weren't being recognized for the work they put in. So it's great to see that the shift is coming and people are finally realizing, okay, this is my worth. But I think there's still so much going on in the market that there isn't an answer to all of this. So thank you for sharing that, Chris. My last question for you, Chris, would be, where are you currently working and whether the company that you're working with is hiring or not?
Yeah, so you mentioned the 20 years in logistics. I was thankful to work at some companies like Uber, that revolutionary type companies. I'm based in Chicago, Illinois, so again, this is a capital of. If you're in logistics in the freight world, this is certainly considered a hub by many accounts. So that progression through some pretty cool publicly traded companies into the high tech sector within logistics and supply chain. I'm now working at a company called Optimal Dynamics. We're headquartered in Manhattan, but we're adopting the same mentality of, remote works makes sense for us. We're not looking we have a great talent pool in the greater New York City area. Again, I'm based in Chicago. We have a presence in Atlanta, and we're starting to increase our presence out on the West Coast. But we've hired people that live in the state of Montana, for example. So it's an opportunity that some folks in that area, a little less populous, would say I'd never have a chance if I have to commute to an office. So. Optimal Dynamics again is we're a company that really plays in AI and machine learning. That's obviously a trending topic in tech. And specifically, we are in what we call a space called sequential decision analytics. My co-founders, a man named Warren Powell, was a professor at Princeton University in New Jersey.
Wow.
And he's got some source code and an algorithm that he applied in the academic community and gradually started to, through a lab at Princeton, started rolling out into the real world. And so really the simple way to put it is we're a decision company. So we take all this data flowing out there, and our argument is we still rely on a human brain, and at least my brain is not robust enough to comprehend and calculate the amount of information it takes to run a logistics network. So, as my boss says, imagine playing 1,000 games of chess all at the same time. That's equivalent of what it's like to manage these networks. We are hiring, to answer your other part of your question. We're hiring and always seeking great engineers, front end, back end, full stack. I'm again more on the go-to-market side. I lead the sales and marketing strategy, customer success. So again, I would say we're in a hyper growth mode. We secured Series A funding mid last
Congratulations.
year. Thank you. So I think we're 23 million so far and the team is now at 30 or 40 and looking to grow and raise some more capital as the markets are favorable right now. So again,
Okay.
happy to speak with anyone that may feel like they check those boxes. And we certainly have postings on our website and among LinkedIn and other employment sources as well.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for sharing this, Chris. It was a pleasure speaking with you. I can definitely see how the US Air Force's values are still instilled in you because I can definitely see the passion when it comes to helping people speaks through when you're speaking about it. So it's great to see that people like you still exist who are putting people first because in a world these days, I think everyone's out there for themselves. So it's great to see such positivity still exists because it's definitely needed. But thank you so much for coming on the show, for sharing about your wonderful company, your insights, and your journey. I learned so much, and I wish you all the best.
Likewise, Manal, thank you so much for having me.